Hey everybody, this is Jake Wynn with the National Museum of Civil War Medicine for our On Tour series here on the South Mountain Battlefield in Maryland. We're going to be talking through a series of videos today about the events that transpired on this very ground on September 14th, 1862 during the Battle of South Mountain, a prelude to the most bloody day in American history, the Battle of Antietam. And this battle is crucial because this is going to be the first time that a new medical evacuation system is going to be put in place in this theater of action under the command of Jonathan Letterman, the medical director of the Army of the Potomac, that is going to be the U.S. Army doing battle here at South Mountain. So we're going to be talking quite a bit today about the Letterman plan, about the Letterman system of evacuation, but we're also going to be talking too about the events that transpired right here and some of the soldiers who are doing some of that fighting. We are on a part of the battlefield known as Turner's Gap. This is a gap over the South Mountain Range that carries the National Road, a major east-west road through this part of Maryland. And it's going to bring these armies, U.S. and Confederate, to this battlefield. A little bit of some background on this particular battle. September 14th, 1862, when this battle begins, we have a Confederate army located just to our west, operating in the Boonesboro, Hagerstown, Martinsburg, Virginia area, as well as a Confederate army operating in the vicinity of Harper's Ferry as well, that strategically important spot. Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general in command of the Army of Northern Virginia, had invaded the state of Maryland just a few weeks earlier. So this is a Confederate invasion, the first Confederate invasion of the North during the American Civil War in this theater of operation. So we have Lee and his army operating west of the South Mountain Range, and to our east, which you can see out in the distance, is the Middletown Valley. That is a piece of geography where we have multiple little towns and villages. We're going to make some stops in those towns and villages a little bit later in this series. Places like Middletown and Burkittsville. And then over to further to the east, you get 15 miles or so to the city of Frederick. This is going to be where the U.S. Army, the Army of the Potomac under General George McClellan, is going to be operating. They're going to be in pursuit of Robert E. Lee's Confederates. And they're going to clash for the first time in a major way here in Maryland, right on these heights where we now are. We are actually standing astride, right now, the Appalachian Trail as well, which does cut through this battlefield. We'll see that again a little bit later when we make a trek just about a mile away to Fox's Gap. So this is Turner's Gap. This is going to see some major fighting during the day and into the evening of September 14th, 1862. There are going to be units that are going to be fighting here that are going to gain a pretty famous reputation, including a group of Westerners in this Eastern Army of the Potomac, the U.S. Army here, that are going to gain a nickname on this battlefield. They're going to earn the reputation as the Iron Brigade for their fighting, literally all around where we are now standing. Another of the units, we're going to bounce over to the Confederate side here, and I have a personal story that I'm going to talk about here. One of the units that's going to be fighting just around the bend here in South Mountain, north of Turner's Gap, is the 19th Virginia Infantry. And they're going to be fighting here, defending, trying to hold back the Union tide that is sweeping up South Mountain, trying to destroy the Confederate Army. The 19th Virginia has a member in Company K by the name of Private J.G. Martin, age 22 years. He is among the men fighting here who is going to be wounded on this day. 5,000 casualties from the Battle of South Mountain. We'll come around on that. We'll talk about that number quite a bit. 5,000 casualties in this battle, including several thousand wounded soldiers. That's actually the same amount as the first Battle of Bull Run, which is much more famous than the Battle of South Mountain is. You can see the level of carnage has risen over the first year of the American Civil War to where a battle of 5,000 casualties is just a drop in the bucket compared to many of the other engagements engagements that are taking place at this time. Private Martin is among the wounded from this battle, and he is among the wounded that falls into a category that is quite terrifying to Civil War soldiers and quite horrifying as we look back 160 years. He is shot through the intestines. He is gut shot. And this is a classification of wounds that is under Civil War medical care and an early form of triage that is going to be used by the U.S. and Confederate armies during this war is going to be put into a class of what are known as mortal wounds. These are wounds that are typically considered fatal, that the wounded soldier will succumb to their wounds. And this is generally any wound to the core of the body or to the head. There's very little that Civil War medical practitioners can do for those soldiers who are suffering from wounds to the core of the body. Very little is understood about infection and about head injuries as well. So there's very little that a Civil War doctor could do for a patient. But what is interesting about Private Martin's case is that there are some extensive things that the Civil War doctors are going to do. Specifically, he is going to be cared for by the U.S. Army. Private Martin is captured by the Army of the Potomac here at South Mountain. And his case history is preserved in the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion. And this is an amazing series of books published by the United States War Department that examines the medical history of the American Civil War and preserves case studies like Private Martin's. And so what I'm going to do now is just take you through that case history. I'll read through it with you all, talk a little bit about it. I will put a kind of content warning on this particular video. As with many of our videos, we address some pretty heavy topics, talking about woundings, talking about Civil War medical care. This case in particular, talking about an intestinal wound, does get to be a little graphic, so putting that warning on here. But I think crucial to understanding the realities of what Civil War battlefields are like, what Civil War wounds are like, and ultimately what the surgeons who are trying to save patients' lives, what they're facing. So this is case 244, Private J.G. Martin, Company K, 19th Virginia, age 22 years. He is admitted to a hospital, the General Hospital at Frederick on September 22nd, 1862. So just about a week after this battle, he makes his way back to Frederick, Maryland. Acting Assistant Surgeon A.R. Gray makes the following report of his case. Quote, he was wounded at South Mountain, September 14, 1862, by a conical rifle ball, which entered the right natus, their term for his buttocks, 4 inches posterior to and 3 inches above the greater trochanter, or the top of the femur, perforated the ilium, that's the upper pelvis, passed upward and inward, emerging through the wall of the abdomen 1.5 inches above the superior spinous process, the center of the ilium, his pelvis. Upon admission, fecal matter was discharging from wound of exit, and other signs plainly indicated that the lower portion of the ascending colon was injured. Symptoms of peritonitis, an intestinal infection, developed soon after admission and were combated by large doses of opium. Simple dressings were applied to the wounds. So just a note on that first part of this case study, opium being used. One of the things that they do have available to manage pain is opium, given out in millions of doses. You can see, just based on this initial description of his wounds, why these wounds are considered mortal, because rampant infection is going to be the rule in these cases. Civil War doctors do not have an understanding of germ theory, nor do they have the ability to control infection. But we're going to see in this case, they're going to be doing some experimenting that is going to help to save the lives of some of these patients. He goes on, for 4 weeks after the reception of the injury, the external wound of exit discharged fecal matter. At this time, the wound of exit had greatly contracted and the evacuations took place partly through the regular channels. The constitutional and local symptoms of hospital gangrene began to appear at this time at the wound of entrance. At the edges were indurated and everted, and the surrounding skin was undermined. The patient was then removed to the gangrene tent, and the wound was cauterized with nitric acid. So, 2 things to note from this case. We are isolating patients with gangrene, so they do understand infection control in isolating these patients. And also, they're using acid as a way to try to prevent the spread of hospital gangrene. That is important. That is going to be a major innovation that is going to come from the Civil War. The beginning of the conflict, when hospital gangrene first appears, has about a 60% fatality rate. By the end of the war, only about a 3% fatality rate. So we're seeing those experiments going on in the hospitals from this battle at South Mountain and Antietam as well. Nevertheless, the ulcer increased rapidly in size for several days, and fears were entertained at one time. The sloughing would involve the intestine. But by repeated and persevering applications of nitric acid and careful cleaning of the wound several times daily, together with tonic treatment and generous diet, the morbid action was arrested 3 weeks after its first appearance. During this time, however, the copious discharge of fecal matter through the wound of exit returned. So they did control the gangrene infection with the techniques that they were using with nitric acid. Attempts were made to close the opening by means of adhesive plasters with only partial success. After the arrest of the hospital gangrene, both wounds healed kindly with scars. From the lower one, fragments of bone, probably portions of the laminated structure of the ilium, again the pelvis, were removed. Suppuration was free and the pus very offensive. Early in the month of February, we are in February now, and he is continuing treatment in Frederick, Maryland. Both wounds again assumed an unhealthy character. The soft parts in the immediate connection with the wound of exit became sloughy, discharging, fetid, grumous matter, mingled with the discharge from the bowel. The bowel could be plainly seen and felt in the wound, presenting a healthy appearance. They go on October 12th, hemorrhage occurred from the upper wound, the patient losing at the time about 12 ounces of blood. A free incision of the soft parts was made through the entire abdominal wall, into which cold water was injected and a large fusiform clot of blood removed. At the bottom of the cavity thus exposed, no bleeding vessel could be seen or felt, and the source of the hemorrhage could not be found. The wound was exposed freely to air, syringed frequently with cold water, and left open for the night. You're seeing what an ordeal this kind of wound could be if the patient was lucky enough or unlucky enough to survive. At 6 o'clock the next morning, the cavity of the wound was filled with fecal matter, but the hemorrhage had not returned. The wound was cleansed, filled with oakum, which is loose fibers, saturated with a solution of chlorinated soda, and 1 ounce to 1 pint of water. Tonic remedies with generous diet and stimulants, principally porter and ale, beer, constituted the course of treatment pursued. Both wounds again assumed a healthy granulating experience. A plug of lint was kept constantly inserted into the upper wound, and hopes were entertained that it might granulate from the bottom, thus preventing the discharge of fecal matter. His general condition improved gradually, and he was able to walk about the ward. The lower wound had nearly healed, so he is getting better. All attempts at curing the artificial anus by ordinary means proved futile, and the patient, at his own urgent request, was transferred to Baltimore on September 23rd, 1863, for exchange. So he has now been in treatment in the hospital in Frederick for just over a year and a day. He is treated in the General Hospital in Frederick. On September 25th, the patient was transferred to City Point, Virginia for exchange, and on September 28th was sent to Chimborazo Hospital in Richmond. The casebook of that hospital contains the following information respecting the case. Quote, fecal matter escaped from both wounds, did well, and in 5 weeks able to walk about. November 15th, 1863, sloughing of exit wound quickly arrested, and by December 1st, wound nearly healed. When erysipelas supervened. During January 1864, a slight improvement, confined to bed with troublesome cough. In February 1864, slight hemorrhage from the anterior wound. In March 1864, severe attack of pleuropneumonia. During April, general health improved, wounds healthy, fecal matter only escapes from anterior wound, and this with intermissions sometimes 2 or 3 weeks. September 28th, 1864, we are now 2 years since the original injury here at South Mountain, still being treated in the military hospitals of the Civil War. September 28, 1864, fecal matter still escapes from the anterior wound. Injection by posterior wound escapes by anterior wound. Constipation. And on October 6, 1864, Private Martin was furloughed for 60 days. And after that, no further information was related by the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion. And we lose track of Private Martin, unsure of what ultimately happens to him. But he had survived 2 years with that wound. Very remarkable story. The reason that I pulled out this particular case history, not just because it's particularly gruesome, which it is, but also it shows the evolution and development of Civil War medical care. That even though that these doctors don't have the ability and understanding to be able to manage these infections, they are trying and they are experimenting with some new techniques, like the nitric acid on that hospital gangrene, which did prove in some ways successful. So that's one case here at South Mountain, one patient history from a soldier who fought right on these battlefields where we are now standing. We're going to continue on with our On Tour series, going to bounce around to different battlefields, different parts of the battlefield here at South Mountain from September 14th, 1862, and continue to talk about some of the patients who were treated, some of the wounded soldiers, some famous, some not, and look at the medical officers who are in charge of taking care of these soldiers. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, become a member of the National Museum of Civil War Medicine as well. You support this scholarship, and we'll see you in our next On Tour video.